Hi.
Hello everyone. We're on page 288 of In Search of Christian Freedom by Ray Franz in the chapter Blood and Life, Law and Love. Ray is getting into the technicalities as to the things that are now, or were, when he wrote this, 1989, 1990, acceptable. The components of blood that were thought to be unacceptable and acceptable. At this point, we're in the forbidden blood components and practices section. The inconsistency of the Watchtower's policy as to acceptable and non-acceptable components is well illustrated in its policy as to plasma. As can be seen in the chart taken from the October 22, 1990 issue of Awake, plasma composes about 55% of the volume of blood. Evidently, on the basis of volume, it is placed on the Watchtower's list of banned major components. Yet, plasma is actually up to 93% simple water. What are the components of the remaining approximately 7%? The principal ones are albumin, globulins, of which the immunoglobulins are the most essential parts, fibrinogen, I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, and coagulation factors used in hemophiliac preparations. And these are precisely the components the organization lists as allowable to its members. The plasma is forbidden, yet its principal components are permissible, provided they are introduced into the body separately. As one person observed, it is as if a person were instructed by a doctor to stop eating ham and cheese sandwiches, but told that it is acceptable to take the sandwich apart and eat the bread and ham and cheese separately, not as a sandwich.
Leukocytes, often called white blood cells, are also prohibited. In reality, the term white blood cells is rather misleading. This is because most leukocytes in a person's body actually exist outside the blood system. One's body contains about 2 to 3 kilos of leukocytes, and only about 2 to 3% of this is in the blood system. The other 97 to 98% is spread throughout the body tissue, forming its defense or immune system.
This means that a person receiving an organ transplant will simultaneously receive into his body more foreign leukocytes than if he had accepted a blood transfusion. Since the Watchtower organization now allows organ transplantations, its adamant stand against leukocytes, while allowing other blood components, becomes meaningless. It could only be defended by use of convoluted reasonings, certainly not on any moral, rational, or logical grounds. The arbitrary splitting of the blood into major and minor components is also seen to be without sound basis. The organization evidently prohibits plasma, though mainly water, because of its volume, 55% of the blood. Yet it prohibits leukocytes, which, as the Awake chart shows, compose only about 0.1% of the blood.
The absence of either moral or logical grounds for the position is also seen in that human milk contains leukocytes, more leukocytes, in fact, than found in a comparable amount of blood. Blood contains about 4,000 to 11,000 leukocytes per cubic millimeter, while a mother's milk during the first few months of lactation may contain up to 50,000 leukocytes per cubic millimeter. That is up to 5 to 12 times more than the amount in blood.
Then Ray has a footnote on the leukocytes, specifically from the new Encyclopedia Britannica Macropedia of 1987, which points out, quote, most of the leukocytes are outside of the circulation, and the few in the bloodstream are in transit from one site to another, end of quote. So Ray says to categorize them as a major blood component is somewhat like saying that passengers riding on a train are a constituent or integral part of a railroad system personnel. Dr. C. Gouton, in the textbook of medical physiology, explains that the main reason leukocytes are present in the blood, quote, is simply to be transported from the bone marrow or lymphoid tissue to the areas of the body where they are needed, end of quote. So when you get into this fog of detail and technicalities, you realize the futility of any kind of legal restraint in respect to not just blood, but anything to do with medicine that also has to do with conscience. This is exactly how the Jewish Talmud grew. From a series of, as it were, fences around the law of Moses into ever more technical and minute attention to details, finally composes a law code that's far, far bigger than the original upon which it's supposedly based.
Yeah. And I think in this case, where you've got things that only a medical person is going to understand, it was not available to people reading the Old Testament. So how would they have understood the decision making here? It doesn't make any kind of even logical sense to go here in areas that there would be no distinction in the Old Testament.
Yeah. And the next segment, Ray deals with the question, what of the permitted components? More technicalities.